We made our unlikely alliance work in the name of love at any age.
For decades, Diane Keaton had a reputation that followed her everywhere. She never married, moved through intense relationships, and refused to live the way Hollywood expected. One of those relationships was with fellow actor Woody Allen. It was brief, powerful, and professionally defining. However, it ended quietly, without drama, for reasons no one expected. And after her death, Allen finally spoke about Diane in a way he never had before. Diane Keaton and Woody Allen's love story. Diane Keaton and Woody Allen were one of the most studied creative pairings in Hollywood history. They started out as two young artists who crossed paths at the right moment. And what followed was a relationship that shaped careers and rewrote on-screen romance. In the late 1960s, Hollywood was changing fast. Traditional leading men were giving way to more intellectual, neurotic, conversational characters. Audiences were beginning to respond to honesty instead of polish. That shift is what made the connection between Keaton and Allen so powerful and so professionally beneficial. Together, they created some of the most influential work of the decade. Yet their romantic relationship ended quietly, for reasons that stayed mostly private. And, according to Allen, it was something he never fully stopped thinking about. They first met in 1969, when Diane Keaton auditioned for Allen's Broadway play, Play It Again, Sam. At the time, Keaton was just 23 years old. She had recently made her Broadway debut in Hair and was still largely unknown outside theater circles. Woody Allen, on the other hand, was already 33 and well-established. He was a popular stand-up comedian, a published humorist, and a playwright whose offbeat style was beginning to translate to film. His movie, Take the Money and Run, had just come out that same year, signaling that he was moving into a new phase of his career. From their very first interaction, there was a natural rhythm between them. Keaton didn't audition like a typical ingenue trying to impress a powerful writer. She was blunt, awkward, opinionated, and unpolished in a way that immediately stood out. Allen later acknowledged that she didn't just fit the role, she changed the way he wrote. Her speech patterns, her confidence mixed with vulnerability, and her refusal to smooth out her edges became part of his creative voice. They began dating shortly after meeting. Unlike many Hollywood relationships, theirs developed away from cameras and headlines. They lived together, shared routines, and spent long stretches talking about books, music, politics, and ideas. Keaton later described herself as being crazy about Allen during this period. Their bond wasn't built on glamour, it was built on conversation. They challenged each other intellectually, and that connection spilled directly into their work. When Play It Again, Sam opened on Broadway, it became a major success. The play cemented Keaton as a rising star and confirmed Allen as a serious playwright. More importantly, it marked the beginning of a professional partnership that would define the 1970s. Even after the play, they continued working together at a steady pace, moving from stage to screen as Allen's filmmaking career accelerated. Throughout the decade, Keaton appeared in several of Allen's most important films, including Sleeper, Love and Death, Annie Hall, and Manhattan. Each project showed a clearer evolution of their creative partnership. Keaton wasn't just acting in these films, she was influencing them. Her personality shaped the dialogue, pacing, and tone. By the time Annie Hall was made, their romantic relationship had already ended. The breakup happened in the early 1970s, years before the film that would become their most famous collaboration. There was no dramatic public split, no cheating allegations, no bitter interviews. According to both of them, it was simply a case of two people realizing they were too different romantically to sustain a life together. Keaton later explained that while they loved each other deeply, they weren't compatible as long-term partners. Their lifestyles, emotional needs, and expectations didn't align in a way that made marriage or permanence realistic. What mattered more, though, was that the breakup didn't destroy their connection. They remained close friends. They kept working together, and there was no attempt to rewrite history or erase what they had meant to each other. Which is why what happened years later surprised so many people. Because when Woody Allen's reputation came under intense public scrutiny decades after their relationship ended, Diane Keaton did something almost no one expected. Something that would put her own legacy, friendships, and public standing at risk. And that decision would become one of the most controversial chapters of her life. When Diane Keaton defended Woody Allen. When the public conversation around Woody Allen changed forever in the early 1990s, many of the people who had once worked closely with him chose distance. Some stayed silent, others publicly severed ties, but Diane Keaton did the opposite, and that decision would follow her for the rest of her life. In 1992, Allen was accused of inappropriate behavior towards his adopted daughter, Dylan Farrow. The allegation emerged during a highly publicized and emotionally charged custody dispute between Allen and Mia Farrow. Two separate investigations were conducted. No criminal charges were filed against Allen, but the allegation itself never disappeared. It remained part of public discourse, revisited again and again as conversations around power, accountability, and belief evolved over time. From the beginning, the case deeply divided public opinion. Some in Hollywood cut professional ties with Allen immediately. Others continued working with him, citing the lack of charges and the conclusions of the investigations. For audiences, the situation was confusing and uncomfortable. There was no courtroom resolution, no definitive ending, only a permanent question mark that followed Allen's name. Surprisingly, Keaton did not hesitate about where she stood. She publicly stated that Allen was her friend and that she believed him. In interviews, she emphasized that she had known Allen for decades, worked closely with him, and trusted his denials. She made it clear that her stance was rooted in her personal relationship with him, not in dismissing the seriousness of the accusation itself. At a time when many advised her to stay quiet, she refused. In fact, years later, when social media amplified the controversy even further, Keaton reiterated her position in a way that left no room for interpretation. The response was immediate and intense. The tweet spread rapidly, drawing sharp criticism from activists, journalists, and fans who felt that publicly defending Allen ignored Dylan Farrow's account. Many questioned why Keaton would reinsert herself into a debate that had already cost others their reputations. Others argued that her loyalty, while personal, carried weight because of her status and influence. Keaton did not walk her statement back. In interviews that followed, she repeated the same core message. She said she believed Allen. She said she trusted him. And she said she would not abandon a friend she had known for most of her adult life. Friends close to Keaton later said she took Allen's denials at face value and saw no reason to doubt them. According to those accounts, she was privately urged by some to remain silent, to protect her legacy, to avoid backlash, and to let the controversy pass without her involvement. Yet, she declined. As the #MeToo movement gained momentum decades later, scrutiny of Allen intensified, and so did scrutiny of Keaton. Past statements were resurfaced. Her tweet was repeatedly cited. Media outlets described her loyalty as unwavering, but also deeply controversial. Articles questioned whether her stance undermined her long-standing image as a feminist icon and independent woman in Hollywood. The criticism was personal. Fans expressed disappointment. Advocacy groups challenged her publicly. Online discussions framed her defense as harmful. even if it came from loyalty rather than malice. For some, her refusal to distance herself from Allen became inseparable from how they viewed her career. At the same time, others defended Keaton just as strongly. Supporters argued that believing a longtime friend, especially in the absence of criminal charges, was not the same as dismissing an allegation. They admired her refusal to perform public outrage or rewrite her personal history to fit a cultural moment. Diane Keaton remained celebrated for her acting, her independence, and her influence on generations of women in film. But alongside those achievements, there was now an unresolved tension in how she was remembered. Her name became part of a broader cultural argument about loyalty, belief, and silence. For some, her defense of Allen overshadowed her accomplishments. What is undeniable is that Keaton understood the cost of speaking and accepted it anyway. And perhaps that willingness to stand alone, even when it was unpopular, connects directly to another part of her life that has long fascinated the public. Because despite her famous relationships, lifelong independence, and deep emotional connections, Diane Keaton made a choice few expected. She never married. Diane Keaton's chaotic love life. After her relationship with Woody Allen ended, many assumed Diane Keaton would eventually settle into something calmer, something more predictable. But that never happened. Instead, her romantic life became a long series of intense, deeply felt relationships that burned brightly and then collapsed under the weight of incompatibility, timing, or independence. One of the first major relationships after Allen was with Warren Beatty, a man whose reputation in Hollywood preceded him. Keaton met Beatty while working on Reds in 1981, a film he directed, produced, and starred in. The production itself was demanding and emotionally charged, stretching over years and dealing with political history, revolution, and ambition. In that environment, their connection formed quickly. Keaton admired Beatty's confidence and creative control. He admired her intelligence and presence. But the relationship existed inside a pressure cooker. Beatty was known for his restless personal life and resistance to settling down. Keaton, by this point, had already experienced the limits of romance built on intensity alone. Their relationship didn't last long. It ended quietly, without bitterness, largely because Beatty's non-committal nature and the demands of his career left little room for emotional stability. If Beatty represented glamour and ambition, Al Pacino represented something far more complicated. Keaton first met Pacino while filming The Godfather in 1972. At the time, neither relationship nor romance was immediate. They were colleagues first, bound by long shoots and the pressure of a film that no one yet knew would become legendary. It wasn't until The Godfather Part 2 in 1974 that their relationship turned romantic. What followed was not a traditional love story. It was an on-again, off-again relationship that stretched across more than 15 years. Pacino was magnetic, unpredictable, and emotionally intense. Keaton later described him as charming, hilarious, and a non-stop talker. She also admitted she was deeply in love with him. Their connection was real, deep, and often overwhelming. But there was a fundamental problem that never went away. Keaton wanted marriage. Pacino did not. For years, they circled that issue without resolving it. They separated and reunited. They stayed emotionally close even when they weren't together. Pacino's dedication to his craft bordered on obsession, and his reluctance to commit was not temporary. It was a core part of who he was. By 1990, Keaton reached a breaking point. She gave Pacino an ultimatum: marriage or separation. He refused, and that refusal ended the relationship for good. Keaton later acknowledged how deeply that loss affected her. She didn't demonize Pacino. She didn't rewrite the relationship as a mistake. She accepted that love, in this case, wasn't enough to overcome incompatible needs. Pacino, for his part, continued to speak about Keaton with admiration and affection in later years, referring to her as someone deeply important in his life, a partner, and a friend. By the time these relationships ended, a pattern had become clear. Keaton loved deeply, but she valued independence more. She repeatedly said in interviews that she was glad she never married. Not defensive, not regretful. Glad. Marriage, she explained, never truly appealed to her. The structure, the expectations, the permanence, none of it matched how she wanted to live. Her relationships with Alan, Beatty, and Pacino only clarified her priorities. Freedom mattered to her more than tradition. In her early 50s, Keaton made another decision that surprised many people. She became a mother. She adopted her daughter, Dexter Keaton, born in 1995 and adopted in 1996. A few years later, she adopted her son, Duke Keaton, born in 2000 and adopted in 2001. She didn't frame motherhood as a substitute for marriage. She framed it as fulfillment. Keaton described raising her children as the most meaningful role of her life. She did it alone, balancing parenting with a demanding career. Her romantic life may have appeared chaotic from the outside, but to Keaton, it followed a clear internal logic. She chose love when it felt right. She walked away when it didn't. And she built a family on her own terms, at a time when few women in Hollywood did. That independence, however, did not come without cost, because behind the confidence and clarity were personal struggles that Keaton rarely discussed openly, struggles that shaped how she loved, how she worked, and how she lived. The struggles of Diane Keaton. For much of her career, Diane Keaton appeared fearless. She spoke quickly, dressed differently, laughed loudly, and refused to fit neatly into Hollywood expectations. But behind that confidence was a private life shaped by struggles she carried quietly for years, long before fame and long after it arrived. One of the earliest challenges she faced began when she was still trying to find her footing as a young actress in New York. In her late teens and early 20s, while pursuing auditions and stage work, Keaton developed bulimia nervosa. At the time, conversations about this disorder were rare, especially in the performing arts world, where silence and endurance were often treated as professionalism. Keaton later described that period of her life in stark but restrained terms. She said she felt addicted, a reflection of how tightly the illness was tied to her emotional state, rather than appearance alone. The disorder lasted for roughly 5 years. During that time, she kept it hidden from most people around her. She was working, auditioning, and building a career while managing something that consumed her privately. Eventually, in her mid-20s, Keaton sought help. Therapy and growing self-awareness played a key role in her recovery. She did not describe the process as sudden or easy, and she acknowledged that the experience left lasting emotional marks. But she was clear about one thing: she survived it. Later in life, she spoke candidly about the experience, not to sensationalize it, but to remove the shame that had surrounded it for so long. As she moved into adulthood and fame, new challenges followed, some of them physical. Keaton was diagnosed with basal cell carcinoma in her early 20s, making her battle with skin cancer something she dealt with for most of her life. She later admitted that, like many people of her generation, she had been careless about sun exposure in her youth. At the time, tanning was common, sun protection was rarely emphasized, and long-term consequences weren't widely discussed. The diagnosis wasn't a one-time event. Over the years, Keaton underwent multiple treatments and procedures as the cancer recurred. Later in life, she was also diagnosed with squamous cell carcinoma, another serious form of skin cancer. These experiences fundamentally changed how she lived day to day. She became vigilant about sun safety. Wide-brimmed hats, gloves, layered clothing, and long sleeves became part of her daily wardrobe, not just as a fashion choice, but as a practical health measure. What many people saw as her quirky, iconic style was also a form of self-protection. Unlike many public figures who keep health issues private, Keaton chose to speak openly about her diagnoses. She used interviews to warn others about the risks of sun exposure and stressed the importance of regular skin checks. Her message was straightforward: prevention matters, and early detection can save lives. And alongside these physical struggles was the constant pressure of visibility. As a leading actress in the 1970s and 1980s, Keaton worked in an industry that closely monitored women's appearances, behaviors, and aging. She did not fit the conventional image of a Hollywood star, and that difference made her both celebrated and scrutinized. Every choice she made, from how she dressed to how she spoke, and even how she aged, was noticed. Her signature menswear-inspired look became one of the most recognizable styles in film history. Oversized suits, ties, hats, and turtlenecks set her apart visually, but they also served another purpose. Keaton later admitted that fashion functioned as armor. It gave her control over how she was seen and created distance between her private self and public expectations. Humor played a similar role. She often deflected personal questions with jokes or eccentric remarks, keeping attention focused on her personality rather than her vulnerabilities. In interviews, she later acknowledged that her outward confidence didn't always match how she felt inside. Insecurity and health concerns were often hidden behind wit and performance. As she grew older, Keaton also spoke candidly about ageism in Hollywood. Roles became harder to find. Opportunities narrowed. The industry that once embraced her uniqueness became less forgiving as she aged. Still, she refused to disappear. She continued acting consistently, wrote memoirs, directed projects, and remained creatively active. At the same time, she was raising her 2 adopted children as a single mother. She balanced work and family quietly, without framing her life as a statement or a contradiction. And as she entered the final chapter of her life, those who knew her best would later say that the strength people admired publicly was something she had been practicing privately for decades. The final moments of Diane Keaton. In the months leading up to her death, those closest to Diane Keaton noticed a change that felt unsettling precisely because it came so fast. There had been no long public struggle, no gradual withdrawal from work or life. Instead, friends later said her health declined suddenly, in a way that left little time to prepare for what was coming. What made that period even more difficult was that, emotionally, she seemed unchanged. People who spoke with her during those final months said she was still sharp, still curious, and still unmistakably herself. She joked, she teased, she asked questions the way she always had, directly, sometimes awkwardly, and often disarmingly honestly. Even as her body weakened, her personality didn't. To those around her, that contrast made the loss harder to accept. There was no slow goodbye. On October 11, 2025, Diane Keaton died in Santa Monica, California. She was 79 years old. Her family confirmed that the immediate cause of death was primary bacterial pneumonia. No additional contributing conditions were listed. The announcement was brief and restrained, reflecting the way Keaton herself had always approached private matters. Along with confirming her passing, the family thanked fans for what they described as an overwhelming wave of love and support, and asked for privacy as they grieved. 3 days later, on October 14, 2025, Diane Keaton was cremated. The arrangements were kept private. No public funeral details were released, in keeping with the family's wishes and Keaton's long-standing preference to separate her public work from her personal life. Even in death, she remained consistent, present to the world through her art, guarded when it came to her inner circle. As news of her passing spread, tributes began to arrive from across Hollywood and beyond. They came from collaborators who had known her for decades and from peers who had watched her redefine what a leading woman could be. Robert De Niro praised her creativity and described her as one of the very best to ever do it. Jane Fonda remembered her not only as a trailblazer, but also as a close friend. Steve Martin spoke about her wit and originality, the qualities that made her instantly recognizable in any room. Mary Steenburgen, who worked closely with her later in life, said, "Diane was magic. There was no one, nor will there ever be, anyone like her." Candice Bergen called her death a huge loss for her and the world. Michael Douglas and Leonardo DiCaprio also shared tributes, pointing to her influence, her fearlessness, and the way she quietly reshaped film without ever trying to dominate it. In these tributes, there was surprisingly little focus on awards or box office numbers. Instead, people spoke about her presence, her curiosity, her timing, the way she made space for others while remaining unmistakably herself. Many recalled moments that never made headlines, conversations on set, encouragement offered quietly, and a sense of humor that cut through tension without cruelty. In the days that followed, audiences returned to her work. Annie Hall, The Godfather, Manhattan. Films that suddenly felt different now that there would be no new chapter. What people seemed to mourn was not just the loss of an actress, but the loss of a voice that had always felt personal, slightly unpredictable, and deeply human. And as the public remembered her through roles and images, one person whose life and career had been intertwined with hers from the very beginning finally spoke in a more personal way. Woody Allen confirmed what many had long suspected about their relationship, about her influence, and about what she truly meant to him. Woody Allen speaks about Diane Keaton. In the days after Diane Keaton's death, Woody Allen offered reflections that felt surprisingly different from the way he usually spoke about his past. They weren't defensive, they weren't abstract, they were personal, focused, and unusually tender, centered almost entirely on who Keaton was, not what she represented. Allen often traced everything back to the first time he saw her in 1969, when she auditioned for Play It Again, Sam. He recalled being immediately struck by her tall, unconventional, expressive appearance and presence. But what stayed with him wasn't how she looked. It was how she was. Her humor didn't feel rehearsed. Her reactions weren't calculated. She seemed to exist just slightly outside the rules everyone else followed, and Allen recognized that instantly. He later said that she reminded him of a literary character brought to life, not polished or theatrical, but curious, unfiltered, and strangely fearless. In his own words, "I first laid eyes on her lanky beauty at an audition and thought, if Huckleberry Finn was a gorgeous young woman, he'd be Keaton." That originality, he explained, was what made her impossible to replace. From the very beginning, she wasn't simply an actress interpreting his work. She altered it. Her rhythms, her timing, and even her way of laughing reshaped the dialogue he wrote and the stories he wanted to tell. As their relationship developed creatively and romantically, Allen came to see Keaton as singular in his life. He acknowledged that their romance was formative, not because it lasted forever, but because it changed how he understood intimacy, collaboration, and honesty. She was, by his account, unlike anyone he had known before or since. Not just different, but unrepeatable. That belief carried directly into their work together, especially Annie Hall. Alan openly credited Keaton as his greatest muse and made it clear that the film's success was inseparable from her presence. He explained that her timing, her reactions, and her personality shaped the film in ways no script ever could. The character wasn't built for her, it emerged from her. In reflecting on the film years later, Alan noted that Keaton's instincts guided him more than critics or audiences ever did. Her response mattered above all else. He admitted that her opinion was the only one he truly waited for, the only reaction that felt definitive. If she believed in something, he trusted it. If she didn't, he reconsidered. In his words, she functioned as his audience of one. After her death, Alan wrote a tribute essay published in the Free Press, where he struggled, by his own admission, to find language that felt sufficient. He described her as charming, magical, and beautiful, but immediately suggested that none of those words quite worked. He argued that Keaton existed beyond categories, that even language failed to account for her uniqueness. Ordinary rules didn't apply when talking about her, not in art, not in grammar, not in memory. Alan wrote about how certain sounds, especially her laugh, lingered in his mind long after she was gone. It wasn't nostalgia in a general sense. It was a specific, almost physical memory, the kind that intrudes unexpectedly, reminding you not just of who someone was, but of how deeply they shaped your inner world. There was no attempt to romanticize their ending, no rewriting of history. He didn't claim regret or unresolved longing. Instead, his reflections suggested something quieter and more lasting: gratitude for the years they shared, for the work they made, for the way she changed him creatively and personally. In the end, Alan didn't present Diane Keaton as a chapter of his life that closed. He presented her as a presence that never fully left, someone whose influence continued long after the films ended, long after the romance faded, and even after her death. And in confirming just how central she had been, not just to his career, but to his way of seeing the world, Alan said out loud what many had suspected for decades. Diane Keaton was not simply his muse. She was the standard by which everything else was measured. What do you think about Diane Keaton and Woody Allen's relationship? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.